We all had that one friend growing up. You know, the type something just a little off about them. It was like they could never settle into their own skin, always on edge, flinching when things weren't quite normal. High-strung, no fun, yet somehow we still stuck around. That kid in our group was Tim. Tim had an overbearing, overprotective mother and a father who was either drunk or unconscious if he was home at all. Oddly enough, most of our sleepovers happened at his place. His mom would hover, bringing us food constantly before disappearing on her overnight nursing shifts. And his dad? He was usually passed out somewhere, leaving the house eerily empty, just us kids. Tim had one quirk that got under my skin, his fear of the dark. Every night, he insisted on having a nightlight, an eerie, dim glow that stayed on all night. I hated it. I need total darkness to sleep, so sometimes, when I was sure he was asleep, I'd turn it off. Usually, nothing happened. But sometimes he'd wake up in a panic, eyes wide with terror. It must have been an accident, I'd lie, but deep down, I knew I'd done it on purpose. We moved past it like kids do. In high school, we drifted apart. Everyone did. But I noticed something about Tim that the others didn't. He wasn't just his usual weird self. He was worse. His nerves were frayed, like he was on edge all the time. The bags under his eyes darkened, deepening until one day, he just stopped showing up to school. I called his mom, trying to see how he was. She sounded strained, said he was having sleeping problems, and that they were going to see a doctor. But Tim never came back to school. We graduated, everyone went their own way, and I hadn't heard from him in years. Until today. The call came from some Dr. Wobbler at Sunnyside Mental Hospital. He said Tim had been a patient there for years, and now, after all this time, he wanted to see me. I couldn't believe it, Tim, actually in a mental hospital. The doctor couldn't say much over the phone, just that Tim had started talking again after years of silence, and he specifically asked for me. So today, I went. I'd never been to an asylum before. They call it a mental hospital, but that place, it was an asylum in every sense. Guards in white uniforms, patients in identical gowns, and the doctors? They walked around with an unsettling arrogance, like they knew things you'd never want to understand. The whole place felt wrong, a kind of wrong that sticks to your skin. Dr. Wobbler greeted me with that same air of superiority. He talked about Tim's case as if he were some experiment. They'd been trying to get through to him for years, but he hadn't spoken a word until last week. Wobbler seemed almost proud of himself when he mentioned it. It's moments like these that justify our work, he said, oozing self-righteousness. Tim had finally spoken, and not only that, he'd written something, a letter. The doctor wouldn't show it to me, but after writing it, Tim had asked for me. Wobbler rambled on about triggers and psychological blocks, but I wasn't listening. My thoughts were already in that room with Tim, wondering what had finally broken through to him after all these years. I don't know how they expect anyone to get better in a place like that. Tim's room looked like something straight out of a horror movie. Beige, padded walls, a single toilet, a narrow bed. A small window in the door, just big enough for a pair of eyes to peer through, and a metal tray slot in the corner for food. The place felt less like a hospital and more like a cell for someone serving time. It was as if Tim had committed a crime just by being mentally unwell, and he'd already done a few years. "I'll leave you two alone," Dr. Wobbler said as he opened the door, stepping back with a nod. I walked in, and there he was, Tim. He hadn't aged a day, at least not in the way you'd expect. His face looked the same, but his eyes, those sunken, hollow eyes were dead, like the light had been drained from them. His body had thinned out, but the lifelessness in his gaze made him look like a shell. "Tim," I said, trying to break through the silence. He nodded, a slow, deliberate movement. I tried to crack a joke, lightening the mood. "Hey, it's not too bad here, huh? No cooking, no dishes. Maybe I should lose my mind too." My attempt at humor echoed in the room, but it fell flat. Tim didn't even blink. He just sat there, silent, while I talked. I filled the room with my voice for nearly an hour, rambling about old friends, what everyone had been up to, who asked about him. I hoped something, anything, would make him speak, but all he did was listen, or at least, I think he was listening. Then, after an hour, he shifted, sliding his legs to the side and reaching beneath him. From under his body, he pulled out a folded letter and handed it to me. I took it, feeling the weight of it in my hand. "Do you want me to read it now?" I asked, but Tim shook his head. I tried one last time. "Are you gonna say anything? Talk to me, maybe?" Another shake of the head. He didn't move, didn't speak. "All right. I guess I'll get going then." I stood up, feeling a strange chill. Tim didn't react, didn't even acknowledge that I was leaving. He just sat there, staring at nothing. I found Dr. Wobbler waiting outside. "How did it go?" he asked, eyes immediately drawn to the letter in my hand. I told him what happened, how Tim hadn't said a word, how he'd just passed me the letter. But the whole time, Wobbler's gaze never left the letter. I could feel his obsession, his hunger for it. "May I have a look?" he asked, his voice oily with curiosity. Something about his tone set me on edge. I refused, and though he didn't push further, I could tell he was disappointed. "You'll be contacted if anything changes," he said, sounding less interested now that he knew he wasn't getting the letter. "Or if Tim wants to see you again." But I couldn't imagine that happening anytime soon. When I got home, I unfolded the letter. And I wish I hadn't. "Chris, it was good to see you. I imagine if you're reading this, it means you came to visit me. I can't say if I'm okay or not, but I need to tell you what happened to me. I don't know when it started, exactly, but I always felt safe with the light on. I know you hated it when we slept, but it was the only way I could rest. There was always something there, something in the dark that watched over me, or maybe watched me. I didn't care which, as long as it stayed in the light. When high school came, things got worse. I stayed up later and later, losing myself in games, trying to escape. But one night, I saw it one of them. At first, I thought it was just another player in the game, but when I turned off my computer, I saw it in the corner of my room. It stood there, head down, greasy hair hanging over its face. It wore a white gown, its feet bare, and it didn't move. I couldn't tell if it was a girl or something else. I ran to my dad, woke him from his drunken stupor, and dragged him back to the living room. But by the time we got there, it was gone. He searched the house, muttering curses, but there was no sign of anyone. Every door was locked, every window shut. He told me to never wake him again for stupid things like that. And after that, he drank even more. But I knew what I'd seen. Even when I didn't see it again right away, I felt it. You know how, when you turn your head, you sometimes catch a glimpse of something just out of sight, but when you look, there's nothing there. It was like that every night. The letter ended abruptly, like Tim had run out of words or maybe courage. But as I sat there, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had haunted Tim back then, it wasn't done with him yet. And now, it knew I was there too. I swore I could see it, black hair dangling just at the edge of my vision, slipping back into the shadows whenever I turned. Always in the same empty dark corner. Just a trick of the light, I told myself. But then one night I woke up. It was the dead of night, and there they were hovering over my nightlight. Two of them, swaying side to side. One taller than the other, but both with that same long, oily hair hanging down, faces hidden. I called out to them, but they didn't move. Not until I turned on the light. Then, slowly, their heads turned toward me. I froze. Their faces too young, too small for their bodies, twisted and stretched with exhaustion. Their eyes were sunken, so far down their faces that they drooped to their cheekbones. Dark circles etched deep into their skin. They ran at me. I screamed, slamming the light off, and threw myself under the covers. My heart pounded, my throat raw from screaming for my mom, for my dad, for anyone. But my mom wasn't home, and my dad might as well have been dead for all the good he was. He drowned in his drinks, while I drowned in my fear. I curled into a ball, hiding under the blanket, shaking, praying it was all a nightmare. But I couldn't bring myself to check if they were still there. I just stayed there, trembling, until my mom came home the next morning. She opened my door and asked why I wasn't at school. She didn't believe a word I said. The next night, I slept with all the lights on. I thought it would keep them away. But when I woke up in the middle of the night, they were there again. Just standing, staring at me with those eyes black as tar except for the faint glow of their irises. I yelled, but they didn't move. Finally, in desperation, I grabbed a box of tissues from my nightstand and hurled it at one of them. It hit. It bounced off. They were real. I scrambled for my phone, my hands shaking as I fumbled with it. But that's when they charged. I dove under the covers again, the light of my phone the only thing piercing the dark. Their shadows passed over the blanket, and I felt their weight sinking into my bed, pressing down on me. I was trapped. Screaming, kicking, but they grabbed me, cold, bony fingers wrapping around my ankles, my wrists. One of them yanked the blanket down, and I was face to face with their hollow, sunken eyes. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The letter was stained here, the ink smeared with spots of moisture. Tim must have been crying as he wrote. They told me they were afraid of the dark too, Chris. Their voices. Oh God, their voices. Echoing from their throats like something far away, yet right next to my ear. Fear the dark. We fear the dark. We search for the light, to follow the spark. Come with us, there is nothing to fear. Swallow your tears, we are always here. They can't take me during the day, Chris. But at night, they're always there. Waiting, watching, chanting. In the corners we will wait. This is your fate. Come to the dark. It is where you belong. They held me down, their hands cold, smelling of rot and decay. One covered my mouth, and I couldn't scream. All I could do was cry. They leaned closer, their cold, rancid breath on my face. They licked the tears from my eyes, sucked them from my cheeks. I was trapped in hell. When morning came, they were gone. I haven't spoken a word since until now. I asked the doctor for paper so I could write this to you. My mom found me the next morning. I think she knew something was wrong, but she didn't understand. She blamed my dad. They fought. She didn't see them, Chris. I tried to show her, tried to make her understand. I took a picture with my phone, showed it to her. There they were, standing in the corner. But when she looked at the photo, all she saw was an empty corner. They sent me here after that. They said I needed help. But they don't know, Chris. They don't see what I see. Tim's letter ended there, but I could feel the terror pulsing through his words. I could see him, sitting in that dark room, watching. Always watching. The last part was the worst, his description of that final night before they took him to Sunnyside. That night, I watched the sun disappear through the window. The last rays slipping behind the trees, and the darkness creeping in. I saw one of them in the reflection standing next to the floor lamp. I kicked the lamp over before it could grab me, and the bulb shattered on the ground. The thing disappeared, but I knew it wasn't gone. Not really. I looked down the hallway. The kitchen light was still on, but at the far end of the hall, where the shadows were thickest, 3 of them stood. Watching, waiting. I couldn't take it anymore, Chris. I ran, hid in the darkness. My father snored in his chair, oblivious. The darkness was alive. It played with me. Tim's letter ended abruptly, but I could still feel his fear, like it was crawling under my skin. Those things, whatever they were, had taken him. But now they knew I was here too. I still see their faces, the faces of those things. They're everywhere, surrounding me. But now I can swat at them, and they vanish into thin air. My mind plays its sick tricks like it did before, back when I had that nightlight. It used to show me monsters in the dark, twisting shadows into shapes that felt real. The only thing that kept me from running out of the house was knowing they weren't. But when dawn came and the sun started to creep over the horizon, I looked down the hallway again. They were still there, crowding in closer, pressing against the walls. The lights split the sky and they faded to dust, disappearing as if they'd never been there. That was the day my parents admitted me to the hospital. They didn't understand. No one does. Those things, they're here too, in this place. They haunt me every single day. I've covered every corner of my room, tried to block them out, but it doesn't matter. They find ways in. They always find a way. I don't know what they want, but I'd do anything to be rid of them. Please, if you can find a way anyway, help me. But until then, whatever you do, at night, don't keep the lights on. Writing that down. It made it real, like something snapped in my mind, like Tim isn't just insane. Or maybe I am. You know how it is, right? How these things get into your head. Like when you watch a horror movie, and there's some deformed lady hiding in the shadows, waiting in the bathroom. You know it's fake, you know she's not real. But when you flick the light on at night, your blood still runs cold. Your heart races, and you hesitate, just for a moment, wondering if she's really there, waiting for you. That's how I feel now. Like something's in the corner, watching.